So this week we're going to do part 2 of the urinary system, where we're going over how urine is made, including a little bit of dissection, talking about nephrons, kidney stones, and dialysis. So last week we did a general overview, and so we're going a little bit more in depth this week. So you should have this worksheet to go along with the PowerPoint. So if you don't have that open already, you can bring that up and we'll follow along with it while we go through the PowerPoint, okay? So to start with, if we were in class, we would be doing a dissection. So I'm going to get you to go to your worksheet and watch this dissection video on YouTube, and really pay attention to these pieces that are demonstrated here. You can see the photograph of the real kidney compared to kind of the diagram that we've been looking at. So you'll see a real kidney in this dissection as well. Okay, so again, go to this question page and you can click on the hyperlink there. So the question for you is, do you think you would have benefited more from participating in a dissection in class than watching this video, and why or why not? So we've talked a little bit about this, some of you talked about this in your heart dissection reflections, but I want to hear a little bit more about that. So write a couple sentences about that once you've watched the video, and then you can come on back to this. So you could have a really good gross anatomical overview of this, and this is kind of what the kidney looked like. We're now going to zoom in a little bit. We've done all the different kind of major parts, and we're going to zoom in on this bit here. So you can kind of see this little squiggly thing here, and that's a nephron. So that's what we're going to talk about next. So you can see this is a little bit more zoomed in. You can see a big nephron here. And you're going to go watch a video on this as well. It's a really complicated but really interesting structure, so this video breaks it down to make it a little bit more simpler. So again, we're going to head back to this page. You've got a couple questions to look out for in this video, and you can click on the hyperlink here, and those are a couple questions you're going to answer as well, okay? Then you can come back for a PowerPoint after you finish those 2 questions in that video. Okay, so hopefully you had a really good, interesting look at that video and you learned a little bit more about how the nephron is kind of the big portion of the kidney that does all of this filtration process. So we're going to go over the different processes that happen and the different structures of this. So we have the glomerulus, which is a knot of capillaries inside the Bowman's capsule. We've got the peritubular capillary network, which has efferent arteriole, takes the blood to the tissue, and it surrounds the rest of the nephrons. And then we have Bowman's capsule. So this is a cup-like structure where the afferent arteriole enters. So you can see that in a couple of different ways here. So we've got our Bowman's capsule, and inside of that are the efferent arteriole starting, and then it goes into some other structures which we'll go over right now, and you should have seen in that video as well. So we have the proximal convoluted tubule, which is near the glomerular capsule, and it has a brush-like border composed of microvilli, which increase surface area for filtration. If you remember about that, we had the same sort of microvilli increasing surface area in the digestive system. We also have the loop of Henle, or the loop of the nephron. This descending limb allows water to leave, and the ascending limb sends out salt. So this is part of the filtration process through urine. Then we have the distal convoluted tubule, which has numerous mitochondria, is responsible for tubular secretion and moves molecules from the blood into the tubule. And we've got the collecting ducts, which are located in the renal medulla, and they give the renal pyramid their lined appearance, and they collect the waste for removal. So these are all of our structures in the nephron, and we've got some more images showing some of these. So this is a little more overview, and this goes a little bit more detailed. So we've got the loop of Henle here coming down, the descending, and then the ascending loop. So you remember what happens in each of those portions. If you don't, you can pause and go back to the previous slide and read about it again. We would go in a lot more detail if we were in class, but this is a little bit more of a summary. And then we've got the peritubular capillary network all around this loop of Henle, or loop of nephron. So here it's called the loop of Henle. Here it's called the loop of nephron, same thing. And then these all go winding up here down into the collecting duct. And you can see here the distinction between the medulla junction. So if I go back to previous image, you can see where the nephron goes from the cortex to the medulla and back again. So you can see that kind of process. And that kind of has to do with a little bit of the salt boundaries and things like that. Okay, so now we've got kind of a base understanding of how the nephron functions and all of the different complicated processes it does. We're going to go in a teeny bit more depth with the steps in urine formation. Okay, so we've got glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and then tubular secretion. Okay, so we're going to look at where each of these processes happen in the nephron. So if we look here, we've got the nephron, right? And here you can see a little bit of a summary on each of what's happening in each of the processes. It looks a little bit complicated though, so let's break it down. So glomerular filtration happens in Bowman's capsule or the glomerulus. Tubular reabsorption happens in this portion, and tubular secretion happens in that portion of the nephron. So challenge yourself, see if you can remember what those are called. We'll go over them in a second, so just take a sec to challenge yourself. So glomerular filtration happens in the Bowman's capsule. I think I gave you that one. So blood pressure forces small molecules from the glomerulus into the Bowman's capsule, okay? So those small molecules are water, glucose, amino acid, salts, uric acid, creatine, and urea. Tubular reabsorption, maybe you got this right, it's in the proximal convoluted tubule. So this is diffusion and active transport returning molecules to the blood. So these molecules would be water, glucose, amino acids, and salts. And tubular secretion, maybe you got this one as well, is at the distal convoluted tubule. So if we go back, tubular reabsorption is here. And remember, that is the proximal convoluted tubule, and distal convoluted tubule is where tubular secretion occurs over here. Okay, and then this one again here, down here, that would be the loop of Henle. So we've got the descending limb and the ascending limb. And then this is where everything gets collected in the collecting ducts. So hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more, and you know you watched that video, which had a really good explanation of it. So the active transport is important because, again, that needs energy, right? So tubular secretion and tubular reabsorption are both using active transport. So tubular secretion, again, the molecules moving from the blood into the distal convoluted tubule would be uric acid, creatine, hydrogen ions, ammonia, penicillin, and outodrics. So things we want to get rid of for getting them out of the blood. Okay, so that is kind of the steps in urine formation. So hopefully that all made sense. I'll just go back here to show you again where everything happens in the nephron, such an important part of the kidney. And then everything goes from the collecting ducts into, that's kind of where the urine is finally formed, and it goes into your ureters eventually, okay? So we're going to look at reabsorption of water and how that is decided. So diuresis means an increased amount of urine, and antidiuresis means a decreased amount of urine. So you may have heard of these terms before. So think about when you're drinking something, maybe it's something you've had in the morning. What is a drink that is a diuretic? So think about that for yourself for a second. You can pause and take a second to think. So a diuretic would be something that would increase the amount of urine you have. Okay, so think about that, see if you get an idea. So we have ADH, an antidiuretic hormone, and when ADH is present, more water is reabsorbed. So the blood volume and pressure rises. So that results in a decreased amount of urine because things are rising. Okay? So when we're thinking about this question, you can again go back to this worksheet and fill it out. So think about a drink that's diuretic, and you can go back and also fill out the 3 steps in your information, okay? So then we'll talk about the next couple questions. So we're talking about ADH, which is a hormone, and you can see you've got this nice diagram that explains everything. So what we do want is to have a normal water content in the blood. We're trying to keep things at homeostasis, kind of at the normal level. So if you maybe eat too much salt, some salty chips, or you go for a long run and you're sweating a lot, your water content of the blood will be low. So that means you have low water in the body and your brain will produce more ADH. So it's saying we need to keep water in the body. So that will result in a higher volume of water being reabsorbed by the kidney, and you will pee less, so your urine output will be low. It'll be a small volume of concentrated urine. So think about, keep that in mind for when we talk about kidney stones. But then that will end up with regulating the water content of the blood to be normal here. So we go back to this. So, but then on the other half, say you drank way too much water. So the water content in the blood is high because it's all being absorbed in the small intestine. Your brain will produce less ADH, and a lower volume of water is reabsorbed by the kidney, so it's getting rid of more of it. So the urine output will be high. You have a large volume of dilute urine, so your water content of the blood will be normal. Again, keeping that, regulating that thing. So if you want, you can think about that chart we talked about last week with the different colors of your urine. What is your pee telling you? And you can think about what color would your pee be when your urine output is low versus when your urine output is high, because we can think about what our hydration levels are at. Okay, so an example is a person who's dehydrated and doesn't drink water. ADH will be released and water will be reabsorbed. And if a person drinks a lot of water, ADH is not released and more water is excreted. So if you hadn't already answered those questions, there's the answers for you. So you can copy those down. Okay. So we're going to move on to kidney stones. Just briefly going over this. So when your urine, remember, is getting rid of waste products, and when your urine has high levels of minerals and salts, it can form deposits which are called kidney stones. So these are kind of deposits of different minerals. Stones can be specifically calcium-based, which is the majority of them, up to about 80%. They could be uric acid-based, which is about 5 to 10%, and some of them can be from infections, which is about 10%. So a high risk factor for getting kidney stones is not having enough volume of liquid in your urine. So there's too much waste dissolved in proportion to the amount of liquid, and it will precipitate out. So that's what I mentioned there when I was talking about the small volume of concentrated urine. So the waste products are concentrated more than they would be with dilute. So it's one of the risk factors of high risk factor of getting kidney stones. And so some of the symptoms, you may know someone who has had kidney stones, who's passed them, and that if you do, you know they're very, very painful. That's the biggest kind of symptom, cramping, pain in the back and side. If you remember where the kidneys are located from last week, that's kind of where the pain would be. You might feel an intense need to urinate or be urinating or more often, or feeling a burning feeling during urination. So there are many different causes and treatments of kidney stones. Pain generally comes from a blockage in the kidney. Either, you can see in these images some different spots for the kidney stones. Sometimes they're blocking in the ureter here, sometimes they're blocking in the bladder, or even in the urethra down here. So that's where that pain comes from. So the most common treatment is just to wait for the body to naturally pass this kidney stone, which is again a painful process, but that's kind of the easiest way to go about it. But sometimes if they're more severe, more common, you can have them surgically removed, or there's something called shockwave lithotripsy, which breaks up the stone. And there's a few other options as well, but I think it depends on your individual situation. So those are kidney stones, kind of interesting. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about before we end here is dialysis. So this is a treatment for kidney failure. So again, I think last week we talked about how kidneys are really important because if you have a buildup of too much waste products in your body, you can die from it. So that would be what's happening if someone is having a kidney failure. So there's a few different types of dialysis. You can have hemodialysis and peritoneal, but both do the work the kidneys can no longer complete. So the kidney's no longer working properly, you have an external machine that would do it for you. So people on dialysis usually have to undergo this procedure 3 times a week for about 4 hours each time. So it's a really intensive process, but it is a life-saving process. And one of the kind of treatments plan is to actually have a kidney transplant. So if you didn't know this already, you can live with 1 kidney. So that's kind of interesting. So someone could donate their kidney to you, and you could no longer have to go under dialysis. So the last thing that's the end of today's class. Just take a look at this.